My wife told me that she would rather go to the company couple's dinner with another man, so I followed her, went to her table and said, "Since you would rather come to your company couple's dinner with another man, I would rather you not be my wife anymore. I will send the divorce papers to your home." And as I said this, I realized that it was not only my voice that was shaking, but also the entire floor beneath my feet. That sentence, spat out in the heat of my despair, echoed louder than any argument we had had in years, but she tried to pretend she didn't hear me, tried to soften the scene with a fake smile, as if I were the only lunatic there, but there was nothing to soften it. The betrayal was as clear as the cheap perfume she was wearing that night, a scent I didn't recognize and that, somehow, seemed to have been bought especially for the other man. My heart was beating as if it wanted to rip my chest apart, my eyes were burning and the air seemed too heavy to breathe. Everything in that restaurant seemed to spin in slow motion as I watched her hands on the table, fingers intertwined with his, as if they had never belonged to me, as if our entire history had become just an irrelevant detail, as if our years of marriage, the sleepless nights caring for our sick son, the hugs on stormy days, the anniversary trips and all the dreams we built together were nothing but wind. She looked at me as if I were an inconvenience, as if my broken heart was nothing more than an obstacle between her and the excitement of the moment. Her lover, next to me, didn't even have the decency to let go of her hand. He raised his chin arrogantly, as if he had conquered something precious, and perhaps he had, but it wasn't just a woman he was taking from me, it was my ground, my faith in love, my belief that everything we built could stand the test of time. I left the restaurant with heavy steps, my ears ringing as if the whole world was screaming the same word, failure. I walked aimlessly through the streets, each memory of her hammering in my head with a cruel force, memories of her smile the first time we met, of the promises whispered in the dark, of the times she swore that I was the man of her life, and now I was just a stranger, someone she needed to get rid of to live something more exciting, newer, more forbidden. That night, I lay in our cold bed, smelling her on the pillow, a smell that now made me nauseous, while my imagination tortured me with scenes of her with another man, smiling, laughing, giving him everything that was once mine alone. I spent hours asking myself what I had done wrong, when I failed, when I stopped being the man she wanted by her side, and no answers came, only a suffocating emptiness, as if my heart had been ripped out. So I decided that I would not wait any longer, that I would not stay home like a fool waiting for her to come back to lie to me again. I went to the law office that morning, with sunken eyes like someone who has not slept, and my voice as firm as ever, and asked them to start the divorce process immediately. I wanted to free myself from that nightmare, from that love that was now consuming me like acid. And as the papers were being prepared, I knew that she had finally realized what she had lost, knew that in trying to cement her forbidden romance, everything had fallen apart, that the lover who had seemed so perfect had begun to show her who he really was, and that the thrill of the forbidden had turned to contempt, to indifference, to words that hurt her more than anything I could have said. She called me countless times, each call ignored with a heavy heart, each message begging for a chance read with the pain of someone who still loves but no longer sees a future. Her words filled my screen, "Please forgive me, I was wrong, you are the right man, you always were," but everything sounded empty, too late, as if her love had expired along with my last breath of hope. Friends in common told me that she cried in the corners, that she didn't eat properly, that she said she had been an idiot, that she wanted to start over, but I was no longer there, I was no longer that man willing to fix what was irreparably broken. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life in silence, learning to smile without fear, to walk with my head held high, to discover who I was without her. And then, when I least expected it, a new person appeared in my life, someone who didn't bring the shadows of the past, but rather the light of a future that I never thought I would be able to dream of again. Our meeting was like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. Her kind words reminded me that there was still goodness in the world. Her smile made me feel that I was still worthy of being loved. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to share my days, my plans, my secrets with someone. When she found out that I was divorced, she didn't judge me, she didn't ask me about details that I didn't want to relive. She simply offered me a hug that said, "You are not alone." And it was in that hug that I realized that all the suffering, all the pain, all the betrayal had served to bring me here, to someone who truly saw my worth. While I was discovering this new feeling, she, on the other side, finally understood what it meant to lose everything: stability, affection, complicity, the certainty of having someone by your side, even in the darkest days. Friends said that she called to check on me, that she would stand for hours in front of our old house waiting to see me, that she would send messages asking for forgiveness, but I would no longer answer, no longer respond, because I had learned that forgiveness does not necessarily mean starting over. The nights were no longer lonely, the mornings had meaning again, and every step I took away from her was a step closer to myself, to the man I deserved to be, to the love I deserved to experience. While she tried to put back together the pieces of the life she had destroyed with her own hands, I built a new story, brick by brick, smile by smile, hug by hug. And so, with the same strength that once broke me, I discovered that I could rise even higher than before, that the betrayal was not my end, but my rebirth. And deep down, while her memories haunted me, a question kept hammering in my mind like a whisper impossible to ignore: if she had made a single different choice that night, would we be together today? Welcome to the channel. We do not support cheating under any circumstances. Our stories are completely fictional and their only moral is to show how cheating destroys lives, dreams and hearts. Get ready to dive into a shocking, intense and twist-filled narrative. Enjoy the story and hold your breath. What you are about to hear will move you. The exposed brick house, with large windows and always impeccable curtains, was the perfect reflection of the life that Ethan and Olivia had built together over the past 8 years. Every detail there seemed to have been thought out to accommodate the love that had grown between them since they met in a busy cafe, when he spilled coffee on her white blouse and, between laughs, they offered apologies that became the first chapter of a story that they both believed would last forever. Ethan was a man with a calm demeanor, an easy smile and a look that exuded confidence. He worked as a systems consultant and spent his days immersed in spreadsheets, but he never let his routine distract him from his commitment to remind Olivia of how loved she was. He filled the house with small notes, flowers on random days and messages during work hours just to say that he was thinking of her. Olivia, an art teacher at a local school, had a sensitive soul, was passionate about colors, shapes and sounds, filling the home with paintings that she painted on lazy Sunday afternoons. Her hands were delicate, but her heart carried an intensity that made her unique, and Ethan, from the first day, felt privileged to be the one chosen to live by her side. Weekends were sacred. While he cooked pasta to the sound of old songs, she danced around the kitchen with gentle movements, smiling as if nothing could go wrong in the world. The walls held the echo of their laughter, of their conversations late into the night, of their plans for a trip that they had always postponed because of work, but which remained a shared dream. Their closest friends said that the two complemented each other in such a natural way that it was almost enviable, as if there was something about them that made everything seem lighter, easier, more possible. Olivia found in Ethan a safe haven, someone who always knew how to calm her anxieties, and he saw in her the flame that lit up his days. Her family adored Ethan, describing him as the ideal son-in-law, and his family saw Olivia as a gift, someone who brought light to their always reserved son. At work, Ethan was respected for his intelligence and patience. His colleagues trusted him to lead difficult projects, and he enjoyed helping the younger ones, encouraging them to believe in themselves. Olivia, on the other hand, was adored by her students, who saw her as a teacher who not only taught painting techniques, but also inspired them to believe in their dreams, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Her passion for art was so alive that the children would smile just seeing her walk into the room, spreading joy with her creative ideas. Outside of the classroom, Olivia spent hours in a makeshift studio that she shared with Ethan in the garage of their house, where he would set up his woodworking projects while she transformed canvases into dreamlike scenes. On their wedding anniversaries, Ethan would write long letters recounting every detail of their story, how she blushed when he asked her to be his girlfriend, how they cried in each other's arms when they managed to buy the house, how excited they were when they adopted Max, the dog who now slept sprawled across the living room couch. Olivia, in turn, would paint pictures depicting memorable moments, like their first trip to the beach, when Ethan lifted her up on his shoulders and she screamed with joy as the waves lapped at her legs. They kept these letters and pictures in a special box, promising to open it only on their silver wedding anniversary, when, according to them, they would be old and wrinkled, but still in love. The routine, although sometimes tiring, was full of moments that made it all worthwhile: breakfast in bed on Sundays, movies cuddled up on rainy days, silly arguments followed by laughter and kisses that made time stand still. On the days when Olivia felt insecure about her work, Ethan would wrap her in a hug and tell her that everything she created was magical. On the days when Ethan was exhausted, Olivia would prepare his favorite meal, play his favorite music and remind him that everything would be okay. It was as if, together, they found the strength to overcome any challenge, and that made them believe that they would be united until their last breath. Max, the dog, was a silent witness to their love. He would lie down at the foot of the bed every night, lift his head when he heard arguments, and wag his tail when he felt the lightness of reconciliation. He was an indispensable part of that home, a living bond that reminded Ethan and Olivia that they were a family, even without children. On the coldest nights, they would all sleep together, and Olivia used to say that those were the happiest moments of her life. The photographs on the walls confirmed this: smiles at parties, improvised selfies on trails in the park, passionate looks that overflowed with complicity. The neighborhood saw Ethan and Olivia as the perfect couple. During casual encounters on the sidewalk, they would comment on how beautiful it was to see them walking hand in hand, exchanging affection without caring who was watching. And truly, to those who watched from the outside, they were the picture of harmony, as if nothing could ever separate them. Ethan, always punctual, would pick up Olivia from school on rainy days just so she wouldn't have to get wet, while she waited for him at home with hot tea on winter nights. There were details that showed daily care: the way he would arrange her cushion on the couch, how she would hang her favorite shirt on the clothesline gently so it wouldn't wrinkle, how they would discuss where to plant the flowers in the garden without ever getting irritated. The house they shared became a refuge over the years. The backyard had a swing that Ethan had installed one summer afternoon, when Olivia had mentioned how much she wanted to swing while looking at the stars, like she had done as a child. On their days off, they would spread a blanket on the lawn and have picnics, just the two of them, talking about plans, fears, and dreams. They had a habit of writing down phrases they liked in a notebook they left on the nightstand, and sometimes they would read them together before going to sleep, laughing at the silliest notes or reflecting on the most profound ones. The warmth of that house seemed to have a life of its own, as if it absorbed the energy of their love and gave it back to them in the form of peace. In Ethan's eyes, Olivia was the most incredible woman he had ever met. He was proud of her, of the way she turned gray days into rainbows, of the way she saw beauty in the smallest details, of the way she embraced the world with such tenderness. To Olivia, Ethan was the man who made her feel safe even in the storms, who was patient when she lost control, who believed in her even when she doubted herself. And so the days passed, lulled by promises of the future, of growing old side by side, of a life that seemed as solid as the walls they had built together. Despite their closeness, there were times when an uncomfortable silence hung between them. They were brief but intense pauses, as if they both knew something might be missing but refused to admit it. In those moments, Olivia would look away, and Ethan would take a deep breath, convinced that it was just fatigue or passing worries. They had created such a harmonious routine that any crack seemed easy to ignore, even though, deep down, something was beginning to take shape in the silence. The weekends were still full of hugs, but every now and then, the sparkle in her eyes seemed to flicker like a light bulb about to go out. Even so, Ethan clung to the certainties they had built together. He remembered how she would hug him after their fights, how she would smile when she woke up and saw him by her side, how she would say she couldn't live without him. Olivia, on the other hand, kept in her heart the memory of how he made her feel loved when she needed it most, how he encouraged her to open her first painting exhibition, how he helped her organize classes when creativity was lacking. There was still a lot of love there, but maybe, just maybe, it was starting to get lost in the labyrinths of time, of silent demands, of unspoken expectations. But every time Ethan came home from work and found Olivia in the kitchen with a tired smile, something inside him warmed up, as if all the wear and tear of the day had disappeared. When Olivia saw Ethan asleep on the couch with Max curled up at his feet, she felt her heart beat slower, more comfortable, as if there was still plenty of time to live everything they had dreamed of. And so they continued, between hot coffees and quick kisses, believing that nothing could shake the castle they had built with so much effort, without imagining that, sometimes, even the most solid walls have invisible cracks that can grow until what seemed eternal implodes. The weeks that followed the small silences between Ethan and Olivia began to draw patterns that would only become clear much later. The routine that had once been synonymous with comfort now seemed to tighten their chests on random days, as if the air inside the house had become heavier, as if the walls absorbed the unspoken words and returned them in the form of distrust. Olivia began to arrive home later, always with plausible justifications: a meeting that had gone on for too long, a colleague who needed to talk to, a student who couldn't finish his work and asked for help. Ethan, at first, didn't suspect anything. He only saw the dedicated woman he had always loved, someone who cared too much about everything around her, including others. But her gaze, once so full of light, now seemed to light up only when she looked at her cell phone, which vibrated frequently at odd hours, bringing short smiles and sighs that she tried to hide when she realized he was watching her. Dinners began to fall silent, conversations limited to trivialities about traffic, the weather, or what Max had gotten up to during the day. Ethan missed the easy laughter, the exchange of confidences that brought them together before falling asleep, but he convinced himself that it was just a phase, a stressful moment that would soon pass. Olivia, for her part, tried hard to maintain normalcy, but whenever Ethan arrived earlier than expected, he would find her on the phone, her voice low and hesitant, hanging up too quickly to seem natural. Little by little, their room stopped being the sacred place where they found solace in each other and became a cold space, where words echoed like strangers. Ethan began to notice details that tormented him: the different perfume on her clothes, subtle lipstick marks on handkerchiefs he didn't remember seeing before, eyes that avoided his when he asked if everything was okay. Mornings, which used to be marked by sleepy kisses and promises of a good day, became rushed, with Olivia leaving in a hurry, often before he even woke up, leaving behind only the smell of coffee brewing in the coffee maker, as if that were enough to keep alive the illusion that nothing had changed. Ethan began to feel a dull anguish, a weight on his chest that became unbearable on nights when Olivia said she had to stay late at school to grade tests. On those nights, he found himself walking around the house, turning lights on and off, feeling like a ghost in his own home, searching in the silence for any clue that could calm his mind or confirm the fears that grew with each passing day. Max, the dog, became his only constant companion, lying at his feet as he flipped through the wedding photo album, trying to find some clue as to the exact moment when everything began to go wrong. The photos showed smiles so sincere, hugs so tight, that he could almost believe that maybe he was exaggerating, that it was all just paranoia. But with each passing day, the conviction that something was wrong became clearer, more painful. Ethan began to notice that Olivia avoided letting him touch her cell phone, that she changed the passwords they had once shared so freely, that she sometimes seemed to get lost in distant thoughts even when they were side by side on the couch, as if her body was there but her mind was somewhere else. At school, Olivia started arriving with bags under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights or perhaps nights she hadn't even spent at home. Some of her classmates started commenting on the subtle changes in her behavior: the impatience that replaced her usual patience, the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes, the lack of concentration in important meetings. She tried to convince herself that she could balance everything, that she could live this new flame that burned in her chest without her husband noticing, that she would just have to keep smiling at the right moments and pretend to be sleepy when he wanted to talk about something deeper. But inside her, the fear of being discovered grew along with the excitement she felt every time she saw the other man's name flashing on her cell phone screen. Meanwhile, Ethan decided he needed to do something to rekindle the connection between them, believing that perhaps a surprise would be able to break the cycle of distance that had been established. He planned a special dinner, remembered Olivia's favorite dish, bought the wine they had on their first date and scattered rose petals around the house, as he had done in the first years of their marriage. When she arrived, the tiredness in her eyes turned into a smile that, for a few seconds, seemed genuine, but soon disappeared, replaced by a distressed look that Ethan could not interpret. Dinner went by lukewarmly, with conversations interrupted by messages that Olivia tried to hide, and Ethan, even holding her hands, felt as if he were holding only the shell of who she once was. That night, Lying next to her, Ethan noticed that the scent in her hair was not the same as usual, a new, more intense perfume that he had never seen in the bathroom. His heart raced as if he had just run a marathon, and he had to control himself not to ask right then and there what was going on. With each breath she took, each restless movement in her sleep, he felt the pieces of the puzzle fit together, forming a picture that he didn't want to see but that became impossible to ignore. In the following days, he began to notice every detail with obsessive attention, the clothes that seemed to have been chosen with more care than usual, the missed calls that made the phone vibrate for a long time when he was in the shower, the conversations that were interrupted as soon as he appeared in the room. Her departures became more and more frequent, accompanied by excuses that sounded rehearsed. "I need to help a colleague put together an exhibition," a student asked for guidance for an important test, the principal scheduled a last-minute meeting. Each sentence was like a nail driven into his chest, but Ethan, holding on to what was left of his love, tried to convince himself that it was all just a coincidence, that he was being unfair, that Olivia would never be capable of hurting him like that. Still, he started doing something he never thought he would do. He checked schedules, looked at credit card statements, asked indirectly about commitments that she made up, all in search of a truth that he feared finding. One day, when he came home early, Ethan found the living room empty and Olivia's cell phone forgotten on the dining table, vibrating repeatedly. The name that appeared on the screen was unfamiliar, but the affectionate way in which the contact was saved made his stomach turn. Overcome with an anxiety that he could barely control, he unlocked the device and read messages that left no room for doubt, promises of desire, plans to meet, compliments that he hadn't heard in months. With each word, the world seemed to spin faster, the house they had built together seemed to shrink over his head, crushing him in a pain so intense that it almost made him collapse right there. Ethan put the cell phone back in the same place, took a deep breath and tried to control his shaking hands, listening to the sound of his own heart like an out-of-time drum. When Olivia arrived a few hours later, she found Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at a blank spot, as if he could no longer see anything around him. The silence that fell was so thick that it seemed to fill every inch of the room. She tried to smile, but his expression made her recoil, as if she had suddenly been stripped of all her masks. Ethan stood up, walked over to her, and said in a low, cold voice, unlike any tone he had ever used before, that he knew everything, that he no longer needed explanations, and that from that moment on, there was no more us. The words came out sharp, like knives, tearing apart any shred of hope that might still exist. Olivia collapsed, mumbling disjointed apologies that he didn't want to hear, and as pain took over every fiber of his body, Ethan knew that that night would change everything forever. The betrayal was finally exposed, naked and cruel, between four walls that had witnessed so much love. And, deep down, something even deeper and more surprising was waiting to come to the surface, something that would completely transform the meaning of every tear shed and every word spoken, something that would make Ethan's pain become just the beginning of a much bigger storm. Ethan's breathing seemed to have no rhythm as he stared at Olivia kneeling in front of him, her eyes watering and her voice choked with apologies that repeated themselves without meaning. His heart was beating like a furious drum inside his chest, each beat echoing in his temples as his mind searched for an explanation for everything that had happened, but there was no logic enough in the world to justify what he had just discovered. The silence that enveloped them had an unbearable weight, as if each second without a word was more cutting than any accusation, and Olivia, with trembling hands, tried to reach his, but he dodged her as if afraid that a simple touch would be able to contaminate him with the pain she had brought into that house. The words came out as a hoarse whisper, "I don't know how we let it get to this point, I don't know why you betrayed me, but I need to understand, I need to know everything, now." Her face contorted in a mixture of shame and despair as she shook her head, unable to organize her thoughts, tears streaming down her cheeks in silent rivers, and when she finally found the strength to speak, what came out of her mouth was a whisper that tore apart what little hope remained within him. "I didn't want it to be like this, I swear I didn't want it to be like this, but I thought you didn't love me anymore, I thought I needed to look elsewhere for what I felt was missing," she said, her voice breaking on each word, and Ethan interrupted her with a scream that echoed off the walls, filled with anger and disappointment, asking how she could doubt the love he had always shown her. She flinched at his tone, but it didn't take long for her voice to gain a strength he didn't recognize, a courage fueled by guilt and the fear of losing everything, and that was how, between sobs and scratched confessions, the secret that would change everything came to light like a blade. The other man who had shared nights and promises with Olivia was not just a coworker or an acquaintance, but someone Ethan considered part of his own story, a childhood friend, the one who had been present at the most important moments of the couple's life, who had witnessed their engagement, toasted their wedding, held the bouquet with knowing laughter and, over the years, had been invited to birthdays, holidays, trips. The same man who, on countless occasions, had sat next to Ethan to talk about life, about joys and frustrations, and who said he admired the union he had with Olivia. The impact of her words made him stagger, as if an invisible punch had hit his stomach, knocking the air out of him. Memories flashed by like cruel flashes, the conversations he had had with his friend, the times he had defended him when others said he was unpredictable, the advice they had exchanged about marriage and happiness, all now turned into a farce. "How could he do this to me? How could you let this happen to the person I trusted the most?" he asked, his deep voice mixed with disbelief and hatred, his eyes welling up not only because of the betrayal, but also because of the deep humiliation he felt for having been betrayed not only by her, but also by the man he considered a brother. Olivia tried to get closer, mumbling that it was a mistake, that she felt confused, that it all started one night when she felt alone and he had appeared offering a shoulder, understanding, compliments that she had not heard in a long time, but Ethan did not want to hear excuses. Every word that came out of her mouth was like acid burning the open wounds in his heart. "You had to tell me, you had to have the courage to tell me before I found out like this," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper of resignation that sounded even more painful than his previous screams. Olivia sobbed loudly, repeating that the other man meant nothing, that she regretted it every day, that she wanted to erase everything that had happened. But Ethan couldn't believe any of it, the images of his friend in his living room, drinking beer next to him, smiling at his jokes, praising Olivia in front of everyone, it all became grotesque, every memory transformed into living proof of betrayal. The air in the house seemed to have been drained, leaving a suffocating emptiness that made him want to run away, abandon everything he knew and rebuild his life far away. As the argument intensified, Ethan's voice became colder, more cutting, asking in details that he didn't want to know, but needed to know. "Was it at our house? How many times? Did you think about me while you were with him?" Olivia hid her face in her hands, shook her head desperately, confessing that everything started harmlessly, encounters that at first seemed like just outbursts from friends who missed simpler times, but that became encounters full of ulterior motives, subtle touches, looks that lasted longer than they should have until they became hidden kisses, forbidden caresses, nights that ended in cheap motels or in his apartment, always with the excuse that he had to work late. Ethan felt the ground disappear with each revelation, as if each detail was a blow that pushed him into an abyss of hurt and indignation. When Olivia finished telling him, silence settled like a heavy veil over them, only the sound of her crying filling the space. Ethan turned his face away, unable to bear the weight of her gaze, and with a firm voice, he declared that there was no future for them, that the love he felt was buried under the rubble of destroyed trust. She tried to get up, to hold him, but he pushed her away with a sudden movement, as if her simple touch could burn his skin. The words that came next sealed their fate. "I wanted it all to be a lie, but you chose to kill what we had, and now there's nothing left but poisoned memories." Olivia fell to her knees again, begging him not to give up, saying that only now did she realize that Ethan was the only man who had truly loved her, but he didn't answer, he just walked away towards the door, feeling his mind spinning between anger, pain and the strange feeling of relief at finally knowing the truth. In the hallway, before leaving, Ethan turned around one last time, his gaze filled with everything he could no longer put into words, and said that not only would he not forgive her, but he would also not allow her to make him feel guilty for having loved her so much. He left, slamming the door behind him, leaving Olivia in tears, alone with the echo of her own choices. As he walked down the sidewalk, the cold night air seemed to cut his face, but it was a relief compared to the suffocating feeling he felt inside the house. With each step, memories of his friend in his house, laughing, toasting, telling stories, came like ghosts that accompanied him, mocking him, showing him how naive he had been, how blind he had been to believe that their loyalty would never be broken. The messages that began to arrive on his cell phone, from friends worried about his disappearance, from his mother asking if everything was okay, from his own friend, as if nothing had happened, only confirmed that the world kept spinning while his life fell apart. Ethan stopped in front of a modest hotel and went in without knowing exactly what he was looking for, but certain that he would not be able to return home. When he threw himself on the cold bed in the room, his mind was boiling with the need to understand how everything had come to this, how someone he trusted so much was capable of betraying him in the cruelest way possible. And, deep down, a question throbbed with unbearable force: would the betrayal have happened if he had paid more attention to the signs, or if Olivia had told him what she felt before seeking comfort in another man? But even in the midst of the pain, something began to emerge within him, a spark of determination that made him realize that this story would not end there, that he would not be remembered only as the betrayed man, that from that moment on he would begin to write a new chapter, even if that meant rebuilding his own life from scratch, far from everyone who participated in that farce. As the tears finally rolled silently, Ethan closed his eyes, ready to face the storm that would come, determined to never allow anyone to break his heart like that again. The hotel room where Ethan had taken refuge that night became his temporary world, the only place where he could exist without having to deal with questions, pitying glances, or silent judgments. The hours dragged by as he stared at the ceiling illuminated by the yellow light of the lamp, his thoughts racing past one another at a speed he could barely keep up with. His cell phone kept vibrating at constant intervals, messages from Olivia begging for a conversation, calls from his friend that became insistent, as if trying to offer a version of events that could absolve him or, perhaps, convince him that it was all just a misunderstanding. Ethan ignored each ring, each notification, as if the device were nothing more than a constant reminder of the betrayal that now marked his life like an impossible scar. When dawn came, he got up with his body heavy, as if every muscle refused to obey, but his mind was lucid and determined not to let that pain imprison him. He then decided that he needed to confront his old friend, not only out of a need to understand, but to once and for all end the cycle that insisted on trapping him in that past. He drove to his apartment, parking in front of the building with his heart beating like a drum in his chest, anger and anxiety mixing in a whirlwind that threatened to explode. When the other man answered the door, a nervous smile appeared on his lips, but it quickly disappeared when he saw Ethan's gaze. The silence that followed was so dense that it seemed to compress the air between them, until his friend tried to speak, his voice low and hesitant. "I know you must be furious, but I can explain." Ethan interrupted him with a cold tone that cut like a razor, demanding that he tell him how long this had been happening and how he had the courage to betray not only their friendship, but also the entire history they shared. The answers came in disjointed sentences, flimsy justifications about moments of weakness, about how he had always been attracted to Olivia, about how he had never had the courage to admit the feelings he harbored in silence while smiling at Ethan at every meeting. With each word, Ethan felt his stomach churn, but he maintained his composure, holding back the urge to explode in violence, determined not to stoop to the level of the one who destroyed him. "You came to my house, sat at my table, laughed at my jokes, and all this while thinking about how to steal the woman I loved," Ethan said, his voice so calm it was almost frightening. His friend lowered his gaze, mumbling excuses that sounded increasingly hollow, until, in a moment of exasperation, he raised his voice and said that Olivia sought him out because Ethan neglected her, that she deserved more than receiving texts during work hours or good morning notes, that she needed someone who made her feel truly alive. Those words hit Ethan like slaps, but at the same time they brought brutal clarity. There was nothing more she needed to hear from that man, there was nothing that could be repaired or forgiven. He turned his back and left the apartment without looking back, walking down the stairs with firm steps, as if each step were a step forward towards a new life. As he stepped out onto the street, he felt the cold wind hit his face, awakening his senses, reminding him that he was still alive, still capable of starting over, even if every heartbeat hurt like an open wound. He drove aimlessly through the streets, letting his thoughts run free, until he decided to stop at a park where he used to walk with Olivia and Max. That place, which once represented tranquility, now seemed full of memories that pricked his mind like shards of glass: the bench where they sat to plan the future, the tree under which they had picnics, the path where they ran together on sunny days. Every corner seemed to echo laughter that no longer existed, but instead of running away, Ethan sat in silence, allowing the pain to do its work, as if he needed to feel each stab so that one day it could heal. While he was there, his cell phone vibrated again. He decided to answer Olivia's call, not because he wanted to get back together, but to make it clear that there was no more room for her in his life. Her voice came from the other end, broken by sobs, begging to meet him, saying that she needed to explain better, that she still loved him, that it was all a mistake that she didn't know how to fix. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the calm of someone who no longer had anything to lose, and said that they could meet for one last coffee, but that she needed to understand that nothing she said would change his decision. He arranged to meet at a small, remote restaurant, where no one would know them, wanting to avoid any exposure. When Olivia arrived, she was exhausted, her eyes puffy, her face full of regret. They sat facing each other, and the initial silence seemed like an eternity, until she began to speak, explaining how it all began in an almost naive way, how she felt invisible at times, how she had let herself be carried away by his friend's sweet words, how each encounter made her feel desired and alive, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan listened in silence, analyzing her every move, every glance she made, every hesitation. When she finished, he said he understood her insecurities, but that nothing justified the betrayal, that a simple request for help or a conversation could have changed everything, but that she chose the cruelest path, the path that destroyed everything they had built. Olivia began to cry, covering her face with her hands, saying that only then, seeing his empty gaze, did she realize how big a mistake she had made, that she now understood that no other man could offer what they had, that nothing in the world would make up for the loss of his love. Ethan, in a firm voice, replied that he didn't want to hear any more promises, that there was no more room for regret, that the only thing left was to sign the divorce papers and move on. At that moment, Olivia revealed what she was still hiding, the last secret that Ethan had never imagined. She confessed that, shortly before she was discovered, she had tried to break up with the other man to save her marriage, but that he had not accepted the end and had started threatening her with messages and audios, saying that he would tell Ethan everything if she did not continue the relationship, that he would show her photos and evidence that he had kept to blackmail her. She said that for days she had lived in fear, that she did not know how to get out of that situation without losing everything, that she had spent sleepless nights rehearsing how to tell him the truth, but she always stopped when she imagined the pain she would cause him. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling his head spinning, the world becoming blurry for a moment. That revelation, which in other times might have rekindled some feeling of protection, only brought him more anguish. It no longer mattered the reason, the damage was done, and nothing could restore the trust that had been shattered. Olivia tried to hold his hands on the table, but he gently removed them, as if cutting a tie without violence, but definitively. He said he deeply regretted what she was going through, but that he could not be her safe haven, that every time he looked at her he would only see the lies, the betrayals, the humiliation she had experienced. The words came out calmly, but filled with a pain so thick that it was almost palpable. Olivia started to say that he could not leave her like this, that she needed him to get over all of this, that she still loved him and that she would do anything to prove that she could change. But Ethan stood up, adjusted his coat over his shoulders and said that he needed to think about himself, that he needed to find a path that would make him happy again, even if that path did not include her. When he left the restaurant, the sunset light tinted the sky with orange tones that seemed ironic given the turmoil going on inside his chest. He walked to the car, feeling the cold breeze on his face, as if nature was trying to offer him some comfort, and for the first time in days he took a deep breath without feeling like crying. As he drove back to the hotel, he realized that every decision he made, every step he took away from that past, was also a step towards himself. He knew the road would be long, that memories would come like waves on lonely nights, that unanswered questions would still haunt him, but he also knew that he needed to build a new life, a story where he could be proud of who he was, where he could love again without fear of being destroyed. In the hotel room, he started making phone calls to resolve what he needed to. He spoke to his lawyer to speed up the divorce process, asked the bank to separate his accounts, and called the real estate agency to put the house up for sale. Each call was like a necessary cut to separate himself from what was holding him back, and even though it hurt, each decision strengthened him. When he hung up the last call, he felt tiredness sinking in, but also a strange serenity, as if he were finally taking control of his own life. For the first time in a long time, he slept deeply, without dreams, without nightmares, just a silent emptiness that, despite everything, felt like a beginning. The mornings began to dawn differently for Ethan, not because the world around him had changed, but because he now saw everything with eyes that no longer wore the blindfold of illusion. The first week away from home was an exhausting exercise in getting up each morning, opening his eyes and not allowing the darkness of what he had experienced to imprison him. He woke up before the sun, watching the first rays of light cut through the darkness of the hotel room, as if the simple movement of the dawn reminded him that, despite everything, life would not stop for him to cry. During those days, he made a point of filling every hour. He revisited places he had once loved to frequent, like old cafes and quiet bookstores, but which he had abandoned while he lost himself in the routine of keeping alive a marriage that was already dead. Each stop was like reclaiming a piece of himself that had been forgotten, rediscovering who he was when he didn't have to conform to someone else's expectations, when he didn't have to pretend that everything was okay while everything was falling apart inside him. In the midst of this process, Ethan began to reflect on his own failings, wondering if the devotion he had offered Olivia had not also been a burden to her, if his constancy, which he was so proud of maintaining, had not made her feel trapped in a love that, for him, was stability, but for her, perhaps, a suffocating routine. These thoughts did not serve to absolve her, but to help her understand the contours of the pain, to see that what they had experienced was not limited to her mistake, but to a series of silences and disagreements that accumulated like imperceptible cracks until they became fissures impossible to ignore. These questions tore him apart, but they also freed him, because they showed him that love, to be true, needed to be cultivated in constant dialogue, in sincere exchanges, in concessions that did not leave the other person feeling alone in an embrace. Olivia's messages became less frequent, but increasingly intense, as if, realizing that his silence was the final sentence, she tried to reach him with words of despair, promises of change, and memories of what they had experienced. Ethan read each one of them with the serenity of someone who had already cried all they had to cry, but still felt a pang of sadness when he saw, in each sentence, the memory of who she had been before everything was lost. He no longer felt hatred, only a deep regret for having reached this point, for not having been able to realize in time that they were drifting apart, for not having had the courage to speak up when there was still something to be saved. This sadness, however, did not paralyze him, on the contrary, it drove him to move forward, to rebuild himself far from what was left of their relationship. Determined not to drown in memories anymore, Ethan began looking for a new home. He visited several apartments, each one offering the possibility of a new beginning, each one representing a new chance to fill the space with different stories, free from the shadows of the past. As he walked through empty rooms, he imagined how he could decorate them, what paintings he would hang, what books he would line up on the shelves, what songs would fill the silence of the mornings. These projections became food for his desire to start over, small breaths of hope that reminded him that, despite the scars, there was beauty in being able to choose his own path. On some nights, he would walk through the streets lit only by the streetlights, feeling the cold breeze touch his face, as if the silent city shared his pain and, at the same time, reminded him that it was possible to move forward. On one of these walks, he ended up finding a small, almost hidden café, where he went in more to escape the wind than because he wanted to have a drink. The cozy atmosphere, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the soft lights created an atmosphere that immediately made him feel comfortable. He ordered a double espresso and sat by the window, watching the rain that was beginning to fall lightly on the sidewalks. It was there that he noticed a woman at another table, alone, also staring lost in the drops that ran down the glass. She seemed to carry the same kind of silence as he did, a melancholy that was reflected in the way she held the cup with both hands, as if the warmth of the coffee was the only thing keeping her present. When their eyes met by chance, there was a mutual recognition, not of faces, but of souls that had known pain. A discreet smile appeared on his lips, as if he recognized someone who, even without knowing it, understood his story. They exchanged a few words about the weather, about the coffee, about how the rain seemed to wash away the city's invisible sorrows. The conversation flowed with a naturalness that surprised Ethan, bringing back a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. They didn't introduce themselves formally, as if they both knew that names were small details compared to the connection that was forming. Amidst restrained laughter and knowing looks, Ethan began to feel a spark of something he thought he had lost forever, the desire to get to know someone, to build new memories, to not allow himself to be defined only by the pain he had experienced. When the rain stopped, they waved goodbye, each going their separate ways, but Ethan left with a warmer heart, as if that brief conversation had planted a seed of hope that would blossom in due time. At the hotel, while he was packing his things for the upcoming move, Ethan received a call from his lawyer confirming that Olivia had signed the divorce papers. The news brought a mixture of relief and melancholy, the official end of a story he had imagined would last forever, but also the liberation he needed to move on. He then called his mother, whom he had not spoken to in days, and found in her voice the comfort that only family affection can offer. He told her, in a firm voice, that he was fine, that he had made difficult decisions, but that he believed he had done the right thing. His mother, moved, said that she would always be there to support him, reminding him that, no matter how much the love between two people ends, the love of those who truly care remains unshakable. As he packed up his clothes, old photos, and books that he had accumulated over the years, Ethan allowed himself to revisit some memories, but without getting bogged down in them. Each photo he found showed not only happy moments, but also how much he had changed, matured, and learned. These memories, instead of hurting him, began to remind him that life is also about allowing yourself to make mistakes, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and that, despite the falls, there is always the chance to rise again stronger. He decided to separate the paintings painted by Olivia, putting them in a box that he would give to her later, not out of resentment, but because he did not want those images, so full of past meanings, to take up space in his new home. In the following days, Ethan received messages from mutual friends, some shocked by what they had discovered, others showing solidarity, but many simply curious, wanting details that he was unwilling to share. He realized that, even in the worst pain, there are those who feed on the suffering of others as a way of filling the void in their own lives. He then chose who he would keep close and who he would leave behind, understanding that starting over also means surrounding yourself with people who genuinely want the best for you. This filter, although painful, made him feel lighter, as if each ties undone were another step towards freedom. On his last night at the hotel, before moving into the apartment he had chosen, Ethan went for a walk and ended up stopping at the small coffee shop again. To his surprise, he found the same woman sitting in the corner, reading a book while sipping her coffee. When she saw him, she smiled brightly in her eyes, and he felt as if the universe, in its mysterious way of conducting encounters, was offering him a second chance, a breath of renewal. He sat next to her, and their conversation this time was longer, more intimate, full of exchanges about dreams, confidences about fears, and comfortable silences that said more than words. At the end, they said goodbye with a hug that lasted longer than any hug he had received in the last few months, a hug that seemed to say that, despite all the pain, there was still human warmth capable of healing wounds. Returning to the hotel, Ethan felt that something had changed inside him. He was no longer the same man who, days before, had believed that he would never find a way out of his suffering. He knew that the scars would be there, but he also understood that they were part of who he was now, and that carrying them with dignity would be the greatest sign that he had survived. He prepared himself to write the next chapter of his life, aware that every step from then on would be decided by him, with more courage, more truth and more self-love than he had ever had. The sound of the cart's wheels sliding down the hallway of the new building echoed through the silent floors as Ethan pushed the boxes he was carrying to his apartment, feeling overcome by a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. Each object he carried seemed to carry, in addition to its physical weight, the memories of everything he had experienced in the last few years, but also a promise of a new beginning, a reminder that now he had the chance to do everything differently. When he first entered the space he had chosen, he smelled the fresh paint and polished floors, the soft afternoon light coming through the still uncurtained windows, illuminating the empty walls that were waiting to be filled with new stories. He dropped the boxes on the floor, took a deep breath and, for a moment, let the absolute silence take over everything, allowing himself to absorb that feeling of freedom that he had not experienced for a long time. The first few days were spent transforming the apartment into a home, hanging pictures, organizing books, and carefully choosing every detail so that everything reflected who he was now. Amidst the open boxes and assembled furniture, Ethan found himself smiling to himself, as if he were rediscovering parts of himself that he thought were lost. Even with the simplest tasks, like making breakfast or watering the plants he bought to bring life to the space, he felt like he was in control, reconnecting with desires and dreams that had been buried in the attempt to maintain a marriage that no longer made sense. At night, he would sit on the makeshift couch, still without cushions, just to watch the city lights twinkling in the distance, and there, in that silence punctuated only by the sounds of the street, he realized that he was beginning to make peace with his own heart. The routine gradually began to settle in. Ethan resumed his habit of running in the mornings, feeling the cold air hit his face and his body responding with strength and vitality, as if each step took him further away from everything that had hurt him. The streets became his allies, silent witnesses to a man who was rebuilding himself step by step, with each breath more steady than the last. He returned to the coffee shop where he had met that woman, and, to his surprise, it didn't take long for him to see her again. She approached him with a warm smile, commenting on how much lighter and more alive he seemed, and complimented him on how much more at peace he seemed. They began to arrange to meet there, always casually, without rushing, enjoying each other's company like someone enjoying a hot coffee on a cold morning. During one of these meetings, she shared that she had also gone through a painful breakup, that she had also learned that loving someone doesn't mean forgetting about yourself. Ethan listened attentively, without interrupting, feeling a genuine empathy that connected him to her in a way he never imagined possible so soon. When she finished telling him, he held her hand across the table and said that he didn't know where this would lead them, but that for the first time in a long time he was willing to find out. Her smile, accompanied by a look that mixed sweetness and courage, was the answer he needed to believe that, despite everything, there was still room for love. Meanwhile, Olivia continued to send messages, but now they were spaced out and more restrained, as if she realized that the distance between them had become insurmountable. She simply asked for news, said she wanted to know if he was okay, that she wished him happiness even if it wasn't with her. Ethan responded briefly and respectfully, thanking him for his concern, but making it clear that there was no more room for conversations that would reopen wounds. These exchanges, although painful, allowed both of them to understand that their story had come to an end, and that, as much as they regretted it, there were things that could no longer be fixed. In one of these messages, Olivia revealed that she planned to move to another city, in search of a new beginning of her own, far from the places that reminded her of what she had destroyed. When he read this, Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a silent relief, knowing that she would leave meant that he too could move on without the shadows of a past always lurking around. At work, Ethan found support from colleagues who, even without knowing the details, noticed his change in behavior. He was more focused, more determined, but also more human, more capable of listening to and understanding the difficulties of others. The dedication he had always had for people took on a new tone, less automated, more sincere, as if the pain he had faced had opened his eyes to the suffering of others in a more empathetic way. His superiors noticed his maturity and invited him to lead a project that had been waiting for months for someone with the courage to face challenges, a proposal that he accepted not only for the opportunity, but as a symbol of the man he was becoming, someone who no longer ran away, who took risks, who trusted in himself. One night when the wind was bitingly cold, Ethan invited the woman from the coffee shop to come and see his new home. She accepted with a smile that dispelled the icy air around them. They sat on the improvised rug in the living room, drinking cheap wine from glasses that didn't yet match, and talked until dawn about their lives, their fears, their desires. Amidst their words, they exchanged long glances that revealed a growing intimacy, but also a deep respect for everything that each of them still needed to heal. In a moment of silence, she rested her head on his shoulder, and Ethan felt the heat of her body warm not only his skin, but also places in his heart that he thought were frozen forever. They stayed like that for minutes that seemed eternal, listening to the city falling asleep outside, sharing a comfortable silence that said more than any confession. As his relationship with her progressed slowly, Ethan realized that each day he became more skilled at recognizing his own feelings, at noticing when sadness wanted to take over him again, and at finding the strength to not let that happen. He began to write down in a notebook all the things he wanted for the future, small and big dreams, goals that ranged from traveling to career changes, to the desire to cultivate true friendships and to experience loves that didn't require him to abandon who he was. This exercise helped him organize his thoughts, to not allow the pain of the past to dictate the rhythm of his days, to remain firm in his decision not to let the betrayal he had suffered define him. One Saturday afternoon, walking with her through a park he barely recognized without Olivia, Ethan realized he could smile sincerely. He told her that this place had once been the scene of happy moments that had turned into bitter memories, but that now, with her company, it seemed to take on new meaning. She listened to him in silence, held his hand gently, and said that places, like people, could be redefined, that everything depended on what one chose to cultivate from then on. These words echoed in Ethan's mind long after they said goodbye that afternoon, serving as a reminder that life doesn't wait for us to be ready to move on. We have to go, even if we're afraid, even if we still feel pain. In the days that followed, Ethan began to plan small changes that he wanted to make not only in the apartment, but in his routine: cooking classes he had always wanted to take, meetings with friends he had not seen for years, readings that he had promised himself but never started. Each decision was made carefully, but also with enthusiasm, because each step reaffirmed the certainty that, despite everything, he deserved to be happy. And it was in this process that he fully understood that forgiving did not mean forgetting, but freeing himself from carrying the hurt like a chain dragged through the days. As he prepared a simple dinner to welcome her back home, Ethan smiled when he saw his reflection in the oven glass. He saw a different man, more aware of himself, more open to experiencing everything that life still had to offer. When she arrived, bringing with her a flower arrangement that lit up the room, he felt that, despite the past being a hurricane that almost destroyed him, he had survived, and was now able to build something that really made sense: a bond based on respect, genuine affection, choices made with the heart and not out of need. Between laughs and glances, while they cooked together, they exchanged confidences about expectations for the future. She confessed that she was also afraid of getting hurt again, and he replied that he did not promise a path without obstacles, but that he would strive every day so that, even in the difficulties, there would be respect and companionship. The hug that followed was more than a gesture of affection. It was a silent pact between two hearts that had learned the hardships of life and, even so, chose to believe that love could still flourish, even among the cracks that the past left. Autumn arrived, and with it a fresh breeze that carried the smell of dry leaves scattered on the sidewalks, and it was in this scenario that Ethan decided to end the last ties that still tied him to the past. The divorce paperwork, finalized weeks before, made official a breakup that had been in his heart for a long time, but he still needed to face Olivia one last time, not to get back together, but to personally deliver the box with her belongings that he had kept and that, at some point, had meant so much. They met in a discreet cafe, away from prying eyes. Olivia arrived with a tired expression, her eyes full of scars that could not be hidden by makeup or elegant clothes. When she sat down in front of her, a heavy silence settled in, broken only when Ethan pushed the box towards her, telling her that there were the last vestiges of what they shared. She took the box with trembling hands, as if holding a wounded animal, and thanked him in a low, almost inaudible voice, her teary eyes reflecting a deep regret that found no room for redemption. There was no more room for hatred between them, only the melancholic acceptance that everything had come to an end. Olivia, leaving the cafe with the box in her hands, walked slowly through the streets, feeling the weight not only of the objects, but of the choices that had led her there. The apartment she had moved to, in another neighborhood, seemed cold and hostile, as if every wall echoed the memories of what she had destroyed. She tried for weeks to rebuild herself alone, but found in every corner the uncomfortable silence that made her remember the words she had said, the lies she had told, the hugs she had exchanged with people she shouldn't have. The nights became long, marked by insomnia and the emptiness that no distraction could fill. Even trying to maintain her routine, visits to markets and cafes became painful exercises in facing her own conscience, until she realized that there was no point in running away anymore. She then decided to move permanently to another city, as she had promised, to start over far from the memories that insisted on imprisoning her, taking with her only the certainty that she would never find the trust of someone like Ethan again. Ethan's former friend, who had been his confidant for so long, began to feel the weight of his actions in every aspect of his life. When the betrayal came to light, the news spread among his acquaintances, and the image of a charismatic man was replaced by that of someone incapable of respecting more sacred bonds. Mutual friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with remaining close to someone who had destroyed a relationship so admired by everyone. Invitations to meetups and get-togethers stopped coming, and even at work, people began to view him with suspicion, which slowly undermined the confidence he had displayed. Alone in his apartment, surrounded by an uncomfortable silence, he began to question not only the choices he had made, but the person he had become, realizing that, in his selfish desire to feel important, he had ended up sabotaging not only the relationships of others, but also himself. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to build his new life with firm but unhurried steps, enjoying each small achievement as if it were a great prize. The apartment began to take on his own personality, with furniture he had chosen little by little, photographs of trips he had taken to visit places he had always dreamed of, books lined up on shelves he had put together himself on quiet weekends. Max, who accompanied him everywhere, became more than ever his inseparable companion, present on every morning walk and every improvised movie night on the couch. The relationship with the woman he had met at the coffee shop grew stronger naturally, as if each encounter were another chapter in a story they were building together without the need to rush time. Their conversations deepened, their hugs became longer, and plans for short trips began to emerge, always with the lightheartedness of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. One of those days, sitting together by a lake on a cloudy afternoon, Ethan opened his heart in a way he had never done before, telling her in detail about the pain he had experienced, the fear of never being able to trust again, the shame of having been betrayed in such a cruel way. She listened to him in silence, caressing his hands as if holding something precious, and when he finished, she calmly replied that she did not want to be the cure for his wounds, but someone with whom he could share the healing process, without rushing, without demands. Her words came as a balm, allowing Ethan to feel that, for the first time since the end, he was ready to leave the past behind and, more than that, ready to allow love to be a part of his days again. At work, Ethan gained the recognition he had always sought, not as an attempt to prove his worth, but as a natural consequence of his talent and dedication. He led the project entrusted to him masterfully, receiving sincere praise from colleagues and superiors. He began to receive invitations to lectures and workshops, opportunities that he embraced not only to grow professionally, but to spread the message that resilience and courage can turn any defeat into victory. This new phase made him feel more confident in himself than he had ever imagined, showing him that life, even after the worst storms, still offers sunny days for those who decide to move forward. The last weeks of the year arrived bringing the cold of winter, but also increasingly warm encounters with the woman who, little by little, occupied an important place in his life. At a dinner in his apartment, surrounded by candles and lulled by the soft music they had chosen together, Ethan raised a toast not only to her, but to the future they wanted to build, without ties to the past, without fear of making mistakes, but with the courage to try. She smiled, toasted him and, with her eyes filled with emotion, said that she had never met anyone she loved so truly, and that, even with the scars, that was exactly what made him special. While Olivia was starting a new life in another city, far from everything that reminded her of her biggest mistake, she and Ethan stopped exchanging any kind of message. This lack of definitive contact gave them both the certainty that the cycle was over. Ethan no longer needed to look back, because everything that was left of his old relationship was buried under the weight of her choices and the strength he found within himself. He learned to transform pain into fuel to build something bigger, something he truly deserved, and even though some days he still felt the shadows of what he had lived, he knew that they would no longer determine who he was or who he could be. At their last meeting in the coffee shop where it all began, Ethan and the woman he now loved looked at each other in silence, but this time there was no more fear or distrust, just the tranquility of someone who knows they are exactly where they should be. She held his face in her hands and said, with a voice choked with emotion, that no matter how long it took, she would be there to help him rebuild himself, to laugh at lazy mornings and cry if necessary, but, above all, to live each day with truth. Ethan replied that, after everything, he had understood that love is not made of empty promises, but of small gestures that, added together, build something solid, and he promised her that he would make each of these gestures the basis for what they would still live. And so, even with the past still marking his memories, Ethan walked towards the future with determined steps, remembering that the betrayal he suffered would not be his sentence, but just a chapter in his story. Olivia, in turn, found in her solitude the opportunity to reflect on who she was and who she wanted to be, learning, albeit late, that betrayal does not only destroy the other person, but also herself. The man who was her accomplice had to deal with the reality that friendships and trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt with apologies. And Ethan, now stronger and wiser, learned that, as devastating as pain may be, it can also be the seed of a surprising rebirth. Comment below what you thought of this story and share your opinion. We want to know how this plot affected you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more intense stories like this one. Always remember, betrayal not only destroys families and loves, but also corrodes those who practice it, leaving scars that time cannot erase. This channel will never support any type of betrayal. Here, our goal is to show how it hurts, so that everyone can value those by their side and build relationships based on love, respect, and loyalty.